Hello, welcome to Newswatch Live, coming to you directly from Hollywood, California. Today, what do race riots and training our children to hate America have in common? Today on the Newswatch, we'll be talking about highlights from Trump's last press conference, the one that he did yesterday morning right after he met with Bill Barr and Chad Wolf. Then we'll be talking about training our kids to hate America, putting a spotlight on our corrupted education system. And then one quick tip for restoring pride in our nation. All today on Americana X Newswatch. If this is your first time here, just to let you know, Newswatch is a news commentary show that brings a common sense perspective to our weekly news cycle. This show is for conservatives that care about what's going on behind the sensationalized headlines. If you're liking this content, if you get through this show, you're digging it, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, share this video with friends that you have that might also be interested in this content so we can grow this channel. All right, let's get into it. So I want to do something a little different with this show than I've done with past shows. Today, I'd like to focus on breaking down Trump's last press conference. This is the one he did right before he went to Kenosha, Wisconsin yesterday morning. I felt like it was a really amazing press conference. You know, typically these press conferences, if they get brought up at all, they'll get brought up by other pundits sort of in passing. They'll sort of hit one or two points and then it's just on to the next thing. I thought it'd be interesting to really go through, well, I'll be going through about half of the press conference here that he gave and just kind of go point by point through it. And then what I'd like to do is kind of highlight one point that President Trump is getting at with the second half of this video. So the first point that he's making, he brings up an emphasis on addressing the rioting, the looting, the violence, the left-wing violence across all of our major cities. And then he kind of connects the dots between that and the breakdown in our education system in America, kind of the K through 12 all the way through our university. So this is one thing that really interested me, how he kind of pulls these things together. So the first part I'm going to break down his press conference. The second part, I'm going to actually focus a little bit on our education from some of the research that I've been doing recently on authors that have been really digging in a little deeper on this subject of what's going on in our education system, honestly. And by the way, these authors are liberal authors from inside the system, okay? So all my sources here are secular sources that are actually liberal. At any rate, let's get started with President Trump's press conference breakdown. Okay, so at the top of his press conference, he does kind of a quick update on the China virus, talks about the response with progress in treatment and how they've been fast-tracking the treatment. I feel like this is the type of thing that we've been hearing a lot lately in multiple press conferences. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that. Moving on, the next point he talks about, he updates us on the left-wing political violence in our Democrat-run cities. And the way that he goes about sort of breaking this down, well, I'll just share a couple of points that he made first. President Trump is helping these cities, a lot of these cities that are experiencing a lot of mayhem, anarchy, violence, he's helping them in spite of the lack of their cooperation. And why aren't they cooperating? Why wouldn't any common sense mayor, public official of any kind, why wouldn't they just invite the help from the federal government? You know, if your city's falling apart, if your city is burning, wouldn't you be like, DEFCON 5, we need to bring in all the help we can get to save our city from falling apart? In fact, it's one of the points that President Trump makes. He's referencing Mayor Wheeler, and he says he just doesn't get it. Why would Mayor Wheeler find it beneficial to have his city falling apart? Doesn't seem to make sense. Trump, this is a quote from his talk, from this presser. He keeps saying, "Let me know when you want our help, and we will help you solve these problems fast. We'll arrest the criminals rapidly." I mean, how much more plainly can you say? And he keeps saying this over and over again, and yet the press ignores that President Trump has said this to the leaders of our major cities in America. And even Wheeler himself in his talk seems to come out and act like he's not getting any cooperation from the president. He just wishes that we could work together. When it's really all on Mayor Wheeler, honestly, he's just not accepting the help from President Trump. President Trump goes on to say, right now, our police are afraid to take action, lest their life be destroyed. We need to support our wonderful police. This is a duh statement. We need to support our wonderful police. This is so true. Somewhere in the 90th percentile, our police are really good, thoughtful people that love their community and want to serve the people that are in their community. It really is a shame that we've had this incessant pushing of this narrative that police on the whole are these bad guys hunting people down and trying to kill them. I had a guy the other day tell me here in Los Angeles, I mean, of course, it's a biased city anyways, but I'm in a conversation with this guy and he drops in the conversation that the police are like the SS, like the Nazi SS. I'm like, how can you even get there? Our police on the whole, like, I don't know how many millions of cases they have to deal with every year, but on the whole, our police are really great agents of keeping law and order in our communities so that we can feel safe and so we can live, in these big cities all packed in with all these people and still live with each other in relative peace. Anyways, we could go on and on about that. President Trump moves on and he says, Biden spoke in Pittsburgh. Trump calls him out and says he neglected to mention the far left violence in Antifa, which is true. Biden, even in the entire DNC conference, the Democratic National Conference, could not address the Antifa issue. Why is there such an aversion to talking about Antifa by someone that wants to be president of the United States of America? Well, we know why. Because Antifa serves his political ends, so they get a pass. But he'll call out the weird small contingent of far right, which, it's debatable if the group is truly far right. We do have a lot of evidence that Antifa is far left. At any rate, moving on. Mostly Biden seems to be blaming law enforcement. Another point that President makes. Biden mentions right-wing violence and problems, but does not mention far-left violence and Antifa. Points out that Biden is obviously on the side of the radical left. And what other conclusion can we draw other than the fact that Biden and Harris, their ticket, is aligning with these radical far leftists? There's no other conclusion to draw. They won't disavow it. President Trump says these are not peaceful protests that we're experiencing here in our major cities. This is true. It is a war on law enforcement. He says, but he brings this up, and this is something that we don't hear from any mainstream news outlets. Our police, on the whole, they're very talented people. They're just not being allowed to do their job. This is another, what I feel like is a very duh statement. I'm going to quote Donald Trump from this press conference right here. It's very simple. We must jail the lawbreakers, and we must defeat their hateful ideology about America. We must teach our children that America is an exceptional, free, and just nation that is worth preserving and defending. I mean, it really is kind of, it feels like a shock that this kind of duh common sense statement has to even be said by our president. This is the kind of statement that if, let's say we would go back to the World War II generation, doesn't matter if you were Republican or Democrat in that generation, you pretty much got it. One thing we don't have to really clarify is that America is a great nation fighting for freedom in the world. That's one thing we don't have to disagree about. This statement, it's really sad that he even has to say this. The left wants to destroy our country from our cities to our suburbs. Another great point that he makes here. What we are seeing right now is a result of left-wing indoctrination in our schools and universities. And this is what I want us to put a pin in. Remember that. Many of our young people have been fed lies about America being a wicked nation plagued by racism. You know, and at the DNC, they spread this idea like crazy. Meanwhile, of course, ignoring leftist violence and Antifa madness. The irony is that the leftist activity the Democrats are encouraging, or encouraged at the beginning, is now getting away from them. It's getting out of their control. These liberal politicians can't control the monster that they fed, that they helped create. Another Trump quote: "The only path to unity is by rebuilding a shared national identity focused on common American values. This includes restoring patriotic education in our schools and at the same time have no tolerance for anarchy and violence." And once again, this is a statement that's making it's drawing the correlation between our education system and the breakdown there, and we have to return to a patriotic education system, and what's going on in terms of no longer being tolerant for the anarchy and the violence in our cities. He's tying those things together. Okay, we're going to come back to that. He goes on to talk about other great things. Biden's speech, he says he can't even call out Antifa, and I've mentioned this before. You know, how is Biden going to solve a problem that he can't name? And this is a really key point. How can you solve a problem that you aren't willing to admit exists? If it's up to Biden, when he gets in power, he will turn the country over to the mob. And when you turn your country over to the mob, that's when you get fascism. You know, it's been really popular in the last 2, 3, 4 years, whatever it's been, to talk about fascism a lot, and the rise of fascism. Look, if we're all freaking out about where fascism comes from, then we need to stop the mob activity in our major cities. No more autonomous zones, no more just letting people loot stores and then say, well, we understand why they're looting all these stores. I guess we just got to let them do it. No, we need to stop them from looting and rioting and creating autonomous zones. Oh, it's just crazy that we're even having this conversation. So, like I said before, Donald Trump is connecting the dots between the actions of our young adult protesters and rioters in all of our major cities and the education system that they grew up in. This is a liberal indoctrination that has been intentional for 30 or 40 years. And it's really bringing now, it's culminating in what we're seeing is actions by our young adults that have been raised under liberal ideology. You could call it cultural Marxism. You could call it, a sort of acceptance and celebration of communism. You could look at it from a few different angles. But the net result of what liberal politicians and our liberal education system has done is created a generation of young people that feel entitled to be violent in our cities, burn things down, cause violence, even maim or kill people that disagree with them politically. Turning our kids to hate America. Spotlight on our corrupted education system. In most cases at this point, a lot of the pundits at this point in the video would really highlight and focus in on cultural Marxism. And I did just mention that. But what I'd like to do right now is I'd like to pivot and look at a slightly different angle on this. Of course, cultural Marxism is the ideology that is driving all this. But I'd like to look at something else that's going on in our education system. I'd like to talk about the role that stagnation in the secular atheist religion of leftism is playing in promoting the cultural Marxist philosophy. Now, it's kind of a loaded statement. I had to write it down and I had to read it because it's such a loaded statement. But what I'm getting at with this statement is this. There's been several authors that have been talking about or addressing this issue of modern stagnation in America. And it's affecting multiple parts of our American culture. Whether it's the career tracks in America, whether it's the university education system, whether it's opportunities for innovation when it comes to entrepreneurship and inventions to make life better. It seems like the targets are getting smaller. It seems like the opportunities are getting less. They're shrinking from the baby boomer generation to handing the world off to our X gen, our millennials, and our Z gen. There's been a sort of shrinking, a stagnation, a move where there are not as many opportunities for the following generations as there were for this kind of burgeoning giant generation. You know, they call it the baby boomer generation because it was a huge generation. We don't always talk about this kind of thing, but the reason why they were called the baby boomers is because after World War II, the greatest generation, all the men came back from war. They were like, wow, freedom is an amazing thing. We just want to make babies. And that is exactly what they did. They got married to the women here in America and they made babies. They got to work making children. And they made a big generation. Big families, lots of kids. The baby boomer generation, when they got into universities, there was a lot of opportunities. It was a great time of growth when they were hitting that coming of age moment in their life. Well, the following generations are smaller generations than the baby boomer generation. And as such, as what has happened was the innovation that was possible during the time the baby boomers were coming up, and as there was an explosive growth in our universities, that growth has not sustained for the X gen, the millennials, and the Z gen. That's what we're seeing right now. I believe that creates a type of existential crisis for the younger generations that are following their parents. The promise of that generation of actually since we came out of the Great Depression, since the greatest generation lived through that first depression, they came out of it. There's been a sort of agreed upon promise in America. We are committed to growth. We are committed to expansion. And it got to be sort of codified in the concept of the American dream. And everybody sort of shared these concepts of, we're all going to pursue the American dream here in America. And it sort of got solidified in this concept of we're going to go to universities. We're going to get these big jobs. We're going to buy these homes and these cars and these appliances. And we're going to get married. We're going to have a certain amount of kids and dogs and all that stuff. And we're going to do life and we're going to experience the American dream. And a part of that American dream is this concept of constant, never-ending expansion. Oh, America, we're just going to keep expanding and getting bigger and bigger, and the possibilities are going to keep growing and growing and growing for every generation coming after. And it got sold so effectively. The kids of the X, the millennial, and the Z gens effectively bought that narrative from their parents so strong that they really believed everything that was being told to them. Yes, there's going to be a lot of expansion. There's going to be a lot of opportunities when I get done with college. So I'm going to be one of the next American successes. One of the next, I'm going to be living an easy life. I'll have the American life that my parents were able to produce. I'll just kind of coast into it like my parents did. Well, we're not seeing that these generations have the same exact opportunities. Now, I'm not blaming baby boomers completely. There's a lot of complacency and a lot of, I guess what you'd say is, what's the word I'm looking for? A lot of our younger generations feel entitled. That's the word. Entitled to success without working really hard for it. But I think that we can't leave this moment without also mentioning that there were a lot of opportunities for young men and young women in their young 20s to start families and afford houses and afford their lives in most of America, you know, the middle class was much stronger in the baby boomer generation. That generation of people did have an easier slide from college into their career life, into sort of a career track that was, it felt robust at that time. It felt like it was still growing at that time. And there was a lot of services that were available at that time, sort of a pre-internet age, where, you know, you could move into a city if you were in the baby boomer generation, and you'd connect with something. You'd figure something out. Now, you know, we live in a global economy, and I'm gonna have to save the talk about how the internet has changed our economy from a local economy to a global economy for a future episode. But what I'm getting at here is this. All that sort of like long sort of trailing off thing, I want to bring it all back around. I believe what we're seeing here is a type of, and I've said this in another video before, a stagnation derangement syndrome. You know, a lot of people talk for the last 3 years about a Trump derangement syndrome. While that may be true, you know, and by the way, there's other pundits that have said things like, well, we've got a really spoiled generation. You know, millennials are very spoiled. And so they're marching into the streets out of their self-entitlement, thinking that they should be given the world. And if they're not going to be given the world, they're just going to destroy everything and tear everything down and burn everything to the ground, burn the system down. That may be true. Okay, there's a guy I'm thinking of right now. He's another really great conservative pundit, Matt Walsh. He made a really good point about the spoiled nature of these younger generations. So I don't want to take away from that completely, but I do want to offer that there may be something else going on that sort of works in tandem with a generation being spoiled. And it's this concept of being raised with a certain expectation by the generations before, that you're just going to treat your childhood as preparation for some elite university. You're going to go to that elite university, and then you're going to come out and you're going to get one of the jobs and be one of the next elites. It's just a given. It's just a natural, you know? And as these kids are getting into college, they're getting more and more disillusioned. I think that our younger generations, as they're getting into college and coming out of college, they're sensing it even more than they're seeing it, because the university is still selling the same line of logic. Everybody's going to be a super success coming out of this college. They're all selling that, you know? But I think that younger generations, rather than just calling bullshit on the universities and what they've been feeding them and what they've been selling them about where success is going to come from, instead what they're doing is they're blaming the wrong system. They should be calling out the liberal-run universities and education systems and saying, you guys sold me a bill of goods. Instead of calling that one out, I think it's easier to stay committed to the faith system of secular atheist philosophy that's being sold to them by their universities, and then go out into the streets and riot and burn everything to the ground and try to take down the governmental system, which feels a little more amorphous. If we can just kind of blame the great bad guy of racism, then we can tear everything down in the name of racism, and we can still retain the faith system we were raised with, which is staying committed to social justice ideology and cultural Marxism. And that's going to bring me back around, okay? I'm just going to read through the books here that have been influencing my thinking really quick, and then I'm going to come back to this thought right here. So let's just put a pin in that thought right there. These are the books that are written by our liberal elites, people that are working in the liberal systems, that are now beginning to call out the university system and the education system that they themselves have benefited from living in, working in, and basically getting rich from. First book, Coddling of the American Mind. Great book to check out. I've made videos in the past about it. I did not add a link. Maybe I'll put a link to this to the video I made already on the Coddling of the American Mind. But basically, gist of it, 3 major untruths that are creating a generation of self-entitled victocrats more interested in complaining than in building. Next book, Algebra of Happiness, talking about the universities as finishing schools for the elite, creating a nation of frustrated adults that think the world should be giving them more than what they are getting for the effort they are putting in. It's kind of a mouthful, but basically we have a generation of young people that think that they should be getting an outsized benefit or a reward for a low effort. And when that doesn't come through, and they're sort of like having a crisis of sorts, a breakdown over that, then it's just easier to complain about the big system, the big bag boogeyman, and how that let everybody down, and let's just burn the whole system to the ground, rather than saying, you know what, maybe the system I was raised in, the university system, might be broken, and I might have to start over again. I might have to innovate myself. I might have to look for new and different opportunities that are scary. The world might not be protecting me and taking care of me the way that my helicopter parents and bulldozer parents did for me when I was growing up. Next book, Meritocracy Trap. University system as a game that only favors the rich elite and uses minorities as props to launder their real priority of creating the next elite class. This is a major book written by a liberal, by the way. He hates Trump. In the book, he's like openly talking about how he doesn't like Trump, but he does get at some truths. Not all liberals, not every single idea a liberal shares is negative just because it comes from a liberal, or it's wrong just because it comes from a liberal. His ideas are pretty spot on here. He calls out the fact that universities, in all of the big scale that they're working at, are literally admitting in people that do not actually qualify to be there based on their minority status, so that they can launder what they're really doing, which is taking the elite 1%'s money and prepping their kids to be the next elites. That is their real priority at these universities. It's gross, particularly at our top 4 to 10 universities in our country. It's nasty. He's calling it out. I applaud this guy for even going there. Next book, 0 to 1, by a guy named Peter Thiel. You know him, started PayPal. And I don't know if he gets at this in the book itself, but there was a bunch of interviews he did when the book came out. Some really good concepts that came out of a few of his interviews. One concept that he shared is this idea that universities are the atheist religion. In fact, it's almost exactly one-to-one correlation in mirroring the Catholic Church system from 500 years ago. It's fascinating the way he breaks it down. I don't have the exact interview where he gets into that stuff, but I think he does it several times. Really good points that he makes about that. I'm not going to get into all of it here. And he's actually the one that really got me thinking about stagnation in America. Used to be a really common thing to believe that universities was the path to constant, never-ending expansion and growth and success. You're going to have an easy life because you went to a big, bad university. The old saying, what was it? Go to Yale or go to hell. This concept of get into the best university, succeed there, otherwise your life is ruined. You're going to have a crappy life if you're not one of these elites. And getting back to another book, The Meritocracy Trap, Daniel Markowitz makes some really great points in his book about how the meritocracy system of America is not even really working for the elites that it was built to serve. Great book to check out if you don't mind it's a long book. You got to really dig in. But at least go through the first couple of chapters. Get it on Audible. Listen to it when you're on your hike, okay? All right, so where's all this going? We are training generations of young Americans to be miserable. And I believe this is how we can begin to connect the dots between the way we've been educating our kids, even beyond the cultural Marxism aspect of it. In fact, I've given this a little bit of thought. Cultural Marxism by itself, I don't know if it's sexy enough to sell to kids in school. I think you need these kind of buzzwords or buzz phrases or movements like all police are really bad guys looking to hurt people. That's a narrative. It's an easy one to sell. You can build fear around that. You can motivate people through fear off that concept. Another one would be like the Black Lives Matter. That whole concept of America is systemically racist. There's nothing we can do about it. It's this terrible, awful place. Systemically, it's awful. It's the worst. So what can we do? We can get angry about it, and then we can invest in this other system, this other religion, this atheist religion. Of course, it's cultural Marxism. Marx is the guy that came up with the whole deal. You know, the world is full of inequality, and we need to pit those that are the downtrodden versus those that are the superiors of our culture. Who are creating the superiors? Who are creating the elites of our culture today? It's the liberals that are creating our elites in America today. Our entire elite class is driven by the university system. This is something that liberals do not want to face. They don't want to talk about that part. In fact, they just want to stick their head in the sand when you start bringing up the system that is really racist, the system that is really driving the problems in our country, the system that is really driving division, the system that is really driving inequality. Yeah, that's right. Our university systems are the ones that are really driving inequality. The problem is not that our country is bad. The problem is that our young generation has been sold a narrative that they deserve the good life as a birthright. No, you have to fight. Each generation now is going to have to reassess and reevaluate and fight for their own success on their own terms. There is no thing to plug into that's going to save you. There's no knight in shining armor riding in on a horse at the end of a rainbow with a pot of gold waiting for you to cross the finish line with a crowd of people cheering you on. No. That life it's our collective, effed up sense of entitlement that will need to be shed if we want to experience a joyful adult life. To let go of our deranged mindset that we will need to admit that the solutions the liberal left has sold us are not working. Our education system, basically treating childhood as college prep, a lot of that was bull crap. A lot of what they were selling you, if you're a young person watching this, it was a narrative that stopped working in the baby boomer generation. And it's been running on fumes since. A few X-Geners broke through, but even less millennials are breaking through, and I don't even know what to say to the Z-Gen. Other than we have to look at this stuff with a more sober mind. And to be more thoughtful, to be more common sense oriented, means to be conservative. So a lot of you that are liberals, you may be watching this, may be time to admit that the system that you were raised in your entire life is a system that is leading you down the wrong path in the wrong line of logic. One quick tip for restoring pride in our nation. We need to shift our focus from what needs to change in some sort of amorphous system, and we need to focus more on what we can change individually within each one of us. Take control of that. My locus of control needs to be here, not on something that's outside of my control, some sort of phantom system that I need to destroy or take down. Focus on optimism and positivity over pessimism and negativity, and look for evidence in your life where things are good. This is so heavy. It's literally the separation between a Democrat mindset and a conservative. The liberal mindset and the conservative mindset. The liberal mindset is a pessimistic, negative one. The conservative mindset is a positive, optimistic one. You know, I have an example of this just literally yesterday. I was talking to a guy. He had mentioned something like, just, you know, kind of more mainstream, you know, just buying in on the liberal line that's sold to him by the MSM. This concept that the police are actually the SS, like the Nazis from World War II era. And he was mentioning that Donald Trump's on the wrong side of history. And he was just so negative, so pessimistic the whole time he was saying it. And, you know, I told him, well, I guess I tend to have a more positive, optimistic view of the world. And I see a lot of evidence for how our police are not anything like the Nazis, not anything like the SS. Our police are here to save our communities In fact, if it weren't for the police, our communities would completely fall apart right now. And Donald Trump on the wrong side of history. It's Antifa and BLM that are on the wrong side of history. And I told him, I'm sorry, man. I predict that Donald Trump's going to win in a landslide in November. And probably not just Donald Trump. I think there's going to be a big shift in politics where we're going to see just a move away from all this negative pessimism. We're going to see people starting to get it more and more. I'd like to leave you guys with this. I don't always cite Bible verses here on my show. I tend to, being a political pundit, I like to work from secular sources most of the time when I'm making my points. I feel like that may break through to some of the people that are still wrapped up in the atheist, secular religion of our country. But in this case, I gotta read you a Bible verse. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. This comes from Philippians 4:8. Just want to leave you guys with that. To kind of tie it all back together, really what we're dealing with right now is a civil war of ideologies in America right now. There's the left, who in essence is supporting the far left, that have one agenda: to drive our country further and further in the direction of secular atheism, which in essence is there to sell Marxist philosophy. And then we have a more optimistic view of the country, which is a more God-centered viewpoint that is more Christian in orientation, Judeo-Christian values. It really is going to determine the health and the future of our country. I'd like to encourage you, as you're thinking through all these things for yourself, to not be affected by the voices of the mainstream news and really truly think through it for yourself. Really apply your own common sense, reason, and logic. All right, this has been another episode of Americana X Newswatch. If you like this episode, like, comment, subscribe. Hey, even if you didn't like this episode, like, comment, and subscribe, and share it. Even if you didn't like it, share it. All right, we'll see you guys next time.